Welcome back to Hired Gun, where I have some fucking words. I'm still working on them, though. Alright, let me go with my first feeling, which is... I don't particularly like Halo Reach, and I think it's kind of a bad game. I'll explain why that's relevant. This should have ended with me fighting the whole bar, because everybody's trying to kill me. Because this reveal is very obvious. It's the, you were a tool, you were being used, now you're wanted, and you know, so on. And then to show that, oh, actually, this idea of the bar being a place of peace where people can't fight each other is only true up until a point, because the whole of Necromunda and the Imperium in general is all a bunch of layered social contracts and barely held together understood normalcy that can break down at the smallest thing. And so my first thought when seeing that was, you know, it's objective survive from the end of Halo Reach, which that's a whole other topic that maybe I'll talk about one day that I think is kind of terrible but also kind of effective. But the end of the game should have been running the credits down the sides of the screen while I try and survive as long as possible in the bar. Except what I think that they're about to do is that they're just going to let me continue to be in the bar for some reason, and I'm gonna have to stare at my unwanted poster for as long as I play the game after. This game... I don't think this game actually got worse as it went on. I think it was always as bad as it was. And it was just more noticeable the longer I went on, and the more punishing it made the levels, the more stupidly bullet spongy it made all the enemies. And on top of that, I was also just running out of patience for its shit. Like, at some point, the little quirks stop being charming and start being annoying. Because it's not improving them, you know? This is so far from being a good game, and yet is so deeply compelling and good in very certain ways that I'm still deeply disappointed that it turned out to be as kind of bleh as it is. The whole concept is great. The being a tiny person in a tiny corner of an enormous planet that is actually only a tiny, you know, thing in the grand scheme of the Imperium, of the galaxy in general, is all great ideas. Having it be a movement shooter, also great ideas, especially for these epic scale locations that are actually really well put together. Sometimes not the nicest looking. Sometimes they could use some extra... Well, yeah, I called it. Sometimes they could use some extra, you know, TLC. Could have used some nicer texturing, or like, this is a UE4 game, but some of these textures look like UE3. The variety of guns, the IP that they're using, it's all fun. It all has a lot to work with. It's all interesting and has a lot of different ways it can go. And instead, it's just, we gave you a lot of tools, and the only one you're going to use is the one where you shoot as many bullets as fast as possible and hope that your war of attrition wins. Because listen, I'm sure there are people who can play this dramatically better than me, who can use the abilities much more effectively, etc., etc. But that doesn't change the fact that objectively, the the enemies are spongy. The movement is inaccurate, is like imprecise. The guns are mostly not very good. And your survivability is all down to dodge and regen. I don't think any of those are arguable points. So you have a game that promises you a lot of different abilities and then lets you use none of them. This is especially a problem when I have to compare this to Divine Cybermancy, which is a shit show of a game. If you've ever played it, if you've never played it, you probably shouldn't. Watch somebody else play it, especially somebody who really knows how to play it, because it's an incredibly impressive game. And while it's very, it's very Slav jank, it's actually very fleshed out. You can give a relatively there are a lot of different approaches you can take to things in that game, and the incredible library of abilities you can acquire and things you can do lend to a real variety. This game feels like they finally got the IP they always wanted, because let's be honest, Divine Cybermancy was always a 40k knockoff. They finally got access to the IP and proceeded to have all of the inventiveness stripped away from it, or at least neutered, because the inventiveness is here. These abilities that I have at my disposal are kind of cool, and the movement abilities are kind of cool, but they're being used in a world that doesn't respect them, because all these enemies have huge splash damage guns that blind you, that they can fire from extremely long distance, with far more accuracy than you can ever hit them with. And so the only answer is to ever get up close and personal and try and spam as much damage as possible. And it's very unsatisfying. And we get to the end of the game, and all of the character development, all of the intrigue, everything about what's curious is like I said at the end of 2 episodes ago, I think, during that big cutscene, that should be the hook for the end of the first act, where the intrigue opens up. You start to understand the world that you're in better. You start to understand your place in it. Your character you're playing is very naive, especially for somebody who's allegedly been a bounty hunter for some time in the Underhive. They shouldn't be that surprised that this is what happens, and they should be far more skeptical about what's being offered to them and how everything's being delivered. And so if that whole last thing was the end of the first arc, where you finally find out the truth behind the intrigue, you find out who people actually are, and you're immediately betrayed, and there's a change in power dynamic, that would be a much more interesting hook for the remainder of the game. Maybe that's what they always intended. I can only speculate. But imagine if the game did not end here and instead went on to fighting your way up through more, literally and figuratively, upwards. Up through the hive until you get to a variety of different, instead of being in the forges and the waste plants and all these other things, you go higher and higher. You end up in places that are for the higher level residents. You stop fighting gangs, you start fighting enforcers and nobility and things like that, and eventually you get to this story they've only just started to tell now about the way that the influence is peddled from the top down, from the nobility that in the grand scheme of things is tiny and insignificant within the Imperium, but they have ultimate power over billions of lives of people who are literally underneath them in the hive that they rule. And imagine getting your way up there. Now, this is a 40k game, so the ultimate ending has to be you failing, you being betrayed, and the world status quo being perpetuated, because that is the nature of 40k at its core as a narrative. Always is that the Imperium is everlasting, and everything awful about it will always be awful. It is stuck in its ways because it wants to stay stuck in its ways, because everybody's place in the world is so hammered in that any upending of anything at any scale is ultimately means nothing. Things like the destruction of planets or the eradication of billions, trillions of lives mean nothing to the Imperium. They are a line item on a spreadsheet being done by a calculator built into somebody's corpse. Holy Terra doesn't care anything about anyone except for that everybody pays their tithe and that Terra continues and the Emperor protects. Salute and move on and die. That's the beauty, the horror and the beauty, the tragedy of the Imperium, of the 40k universe in general, is that everything has to fail. And that's what, to me, makes it such a compelling and interesting narrative. Now, I've gone off on a tangent about this, but this is my whole point about why this game fucking sucks. This game is given the opportunity and the setup to tell a really interesting story and give you a very surface level and ground floor peek into the nature of the Imperium. And instead, what it delivers to you is a extremely minimal story that will not make sense to anyone who isn't already well versed in the 40k universe. It is barely a story. It barely makes sense, even to somebody who does know what they're looking at. And like I said at the beginning of this series, I am a casual enjoyer of 40k. I so want this game to be good. I want Strumon Studios to make more games. I want them to be given the freedom to do lots of interesting things. I don't know what happened with this game. I don't know if it was rushed. I don't know if there were too many interfering third parties. I don't know if it's just the curse of 40k, that 40k almost always seems to spit out terrible games. I was even going into this game under the impression that this was a pretty good game, and I gotta say, it is not. I hope that 40k, I hope it's the Rogue Trader game, I think. I hope the Rogue Trader game does really well. I've even got a bunch of other 40k games that I'm not going to, let myself be hampered by this, because I love this universe. I think it's super cool. There's so many stories to be told. There's so many angles that you can look at it from, and so many levels that you can appreciate it at. And I'm gonna keep playing 40k stuff, but this game kind of sucks. I can't even... Can I just do these missions? I love how if I click over here, it's hold the button to start it, but if I... It's really just lets you keep doing the same. Okay. Just out of curiosity, is there anything new here? Doesn't seem like it. I don't think I'm gonna grind out any of these these factions. I don't really see a purpose. Man, this game should be so good. And ultimately, it's just a mess. Anyway, thank you for coming along with me on this this ride through 40K. If you enjoyed this, if you enjoy 40K content, let me know. I think I have at least one other game in the IP that I probably want to play. I don't know when I'm going to do it. So we'll see. Let me know your thoughts. I've got a lot of them. Anyway, see you guys for something different next time.